か昔本当の時を奪われたせいで五感が低下し、テレパシーだとか想念の力とか今とは想像をはるかに超えた別の次元のクリエイティブなテクノロジーを失ってしまったんだよ。いつの時代も毒を持った悪い奴らがいて、その能力を独占するために偽物の時間を作り出し、物質に頼る文明を発達させるために破壊という科学を生み出して、戸惑う人々に対して自分たちの身勝手なへりくつを定義づけるために宗教を操り、その裏でエネルギーを牛耳って経済というお金のシステムを構築してきた代わりに偉大な能力を失ってしまった。何千年もかけて遺伝子的に記憶障害が起こり、何度も何度も生まれ変わって完全にその能力を忘れてしまった俺たちは記憶喪失なのだ。4次元の科学や哲学の話でファンタジーに興味のない人には面倒くさがられるけど、まあ要するにお金を儲けるためにメディアを駆使し、人々をコントロールし。
First off, we're going to hear from the coordinator of Japanese for Peace, Kaz Preston, who is a tireless advocate for a nuclear power and nuclear weapon-free world. Thanks, Kaz.
Thank you, Tim. I have a message from Fukushima that was sent especially for people in Melbourne for this rally, so I'm going to read it out to you. All too soon, it is now 1 year since that dreadful nuclear accident in Fukushima. If you did not actually experience it, the disaster may seem long ago. But for those of us still experiencing the after effects, we have been exposed to radiation every day since then. And the cloud has never lifted from our hearts. As our eyes hungrily observed the images broadcast again and again on that fateful day, the blasé announcement said all power supplies have been lost. I wanted my son and his wife holding 9-month-old baby. It is sure to melt down, so get out of there. That day, my son's family traveled south along the darkened highway, still reeling from the tsunami, taking 15 hours to travel 230 kilometers to take refuge. Information announcements were few and far between. Concerning radiation damage, announcements only repeated, there is no immediate effect. Not telling us anything about what was happening. Probably less than 1% of the Japanese population understood what the threats of total power loss and venting meant. This is because the government had brainwashed the people with a nuclear power safety myth. After that, the government issued a containment declaration in December, even though they did not know what the conditions inside the nuclear reactors were like. We should not have chosen nuclear energy. This is because from the mining of uranium through the operation of the nuclear power plant until the processing of the spent fuel, workers involved and the local people are all inevitably exposed to radiation, and no safe waste disposal methods for spent nuclear fuel have been established. If there is an accident, the land where many people live will be affected, subjected to radiation over a long time. The accidents that occurred in Chernobyl and Fukushima are proof of that. For 6 months after the nuclear accident, I was unable to stop my tears each day. Although I have been involved in the anti-nuclear movement for 20 years, I was unable to prevent this disaster. I was mortified, saddened, miserable, and felt that all hope for the future had been destroyed. Since that day, I have been exposed to the invisible fear of low-level long-term radiation exposure. Children with a radiation exposure meter hanging around their necks are unable to play outside. What a crazy world. Bearing deep sorrow and resentment, we vowed to each other that we would continue to take action without giving up, without turning away from whatever harsh reality faces us, in order to protect the children and all life. We are now seeking enactment of laws for the support of those who have suffered damage and taking action to hold the government and TEPCO responsible. From the vortex of the unending Fukushima nuclear accident, we are disturbed by the wrongfulness of uranium mining, and we express our deepest respect and solidarity with everyone in Australia who stands against uranium mining. Nuclear power and human life cannot coexist. For our self-dignity and for the future of humankind and other living things, let us continue to march forward together. Machiko Furukawa, Decommission the Reactors Action Fukushima Nuclear Plant 40th Year Organizing Committee. Thank you very much.
Dr. Margaret Beavis recently visited Japan and took part in an 11,000-strong conference for a nuclear power-free world, and she's going to explain why eliminating nuclear power is an urgent medical necessity. Margaret Beavis.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge how terrible the suffering has been for the Japanese people, and this with the tsunami, the earthquake, and now the ongoing suffering with the radiation from the nuclear reactor. I went in Yokohama in January to a conference. It was, as Tim has said, attended by 11,000 people, and it was just fantastic to see so many Japanese people energised and working positively together. Over 100,000 people attended over the internet. Other highlights, Rebecca Harms from the European Union came and told us how Germany is phasing out nuclear power and importing power without increasing its emissions, despite all the cynicism there was that this could be done. There was the governor of the Fukushima prefecture who was very strongly supportive of cutting out all nuclear power. There were politicians from the 5 different parties all arguing with each other as to what was the best way to phase out nuclear power. Another highlight was Peter Watts, an Arabana man, who explained to the Japanese people Australia's terrible role in this ongoing devastation of their country. There was nuclear power plant workers who, from a health perspective, have terrible health and safety. There's terrible subcontracting, layers upon layers, that mean that power plant workers' health is very poorly monitored. The health issues, between 110 and 150,000 have been evacuated. But what is worse is that there are large numbers of people still living in contaminated areas. If you have a child that is exposed to uranium, to 20 millisieverts a year of radiation for 5 years, 1 in 30 of those children will go on to develop a cancer. And that is using very conservative figures. So the Japanese government is failing its people from a public health perspective. The conference called for many things. It called for the right to evacuation of the people still living in contaminated areas, the right for government support to help them with health care and with decontamination. It called for transparency, accountability and responsibility, not just from Tokyo Electric Power Company, but from the government, which has poorly regulated this industry for so many years. It called for monitoring. There isn't even good quality monitoring of the people, of the food, of the water and of the air. It called for a global roadmap to phase out nuclear power. For the power plants, 52 of 54 power plants are currently shut down in Japan. It called for all of them to never be reopened again. Also, what's most appalling is that nuclear power is now being pushed on developing nations by the Japanese, by the South Koreans, by the Americans, by the French. This is a new booming industry, and this is a terrible development, as clearly nuclear power is a health disaster. They called for support of local government who are more in touch with their people and much better at developing areas without nuclear power. So I would ask you all to write to the papers, get onto the web, speak to your politicians, talk back in radio, get people to understand that the Japanese are still suffering from the ill effects of this disaster and that nuclear power is likely to cause another accident down the track. It's just a matter of time. So we need to phase out nuclear power. We have the renewables. The Economist came out just last week saying that nuclear power was no longer worthwhile from even a financial point of view. So why are we risking everybody's health by having this terrible power source? Thank you.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks very much to Japanese for Peace for organising this, and thank you all for coming along on such a beautiful day here in sunny Melbourne. I'm a GP, I'm a general practitioner, I work in Torquay. 12 months ago to this day, I walked into the local Woolworths supermarket to buy some milk and some bread, and I saw on a stack of Herald Suns of all newspapers, the top paper, headline, nuclear reactor explosion, and then half of the front page dominated by this horrendous photograph that I thought I'd never ever see, I hoped I'd never ever see, of a reactor explosion, this billowing cloud of smoke and steam, and what I knew to be the case, full of radioactive toxins that would then spread across the atmosphere, into the environment, into the sea. I remember feeling at the time, not a sense of gloating like people like Andrew Bolt would have you believe, but a sense of deep nausea and pain and horror. I just remember feeling like I was going to collapse just at this thought, and this abiding, growing anger. Anger at the nuclear industry and the people that have been promoting this nefarious industry for all these decades, but also anger at myself for not having taken more action to try and stop it ever happening again. I'm getting on in years. I've been involved in this debate now for well over 30 years. The first time I engaged in a rally in Melbourne was in 1976, when the debate then was whether or not to open a uranium mine at Ranger. It's a long time and the debate's been going on. And I thought to myself, if I stood in Woolworths, I wonder how much of that uranium came from Australia that was then burnt in those reactors in Japan. And I knew for a fact that TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, buys 30% of its uranium from Australia. So Ranger Mine, Roxby Downs Olympic Dam and Beverley were all producing uranium, which when it fissions in those reactors turns into all these horrible radiological toxins which permeate the environment for days and weeks and months and years and decades and generations. Cesium-137, you've seen the plumes, the radioactive fallout maps, all these horrible poisons scattered across the environment which linger there, get into the food chain and will continue to cause health damage to human beings and all the other biota for generations, some of them for tens of thousands of years. Yeah, I was angry, but I also had to acknowledge that because of people like you, we have actually managed to cripple the nuclear power industry. We've kept it at bay. Sure, there are 4 uranium mines in Australia, but there would have been a hell of a lot more without you people. So all strength to your arm. Think about it. On a good day for the nuclear industry, which includes the Australian uranium industry, our uranium ends up as radioactive waste. That's a good day. We haven't even worked out how to deal with that. On a bad day, Australia's uranium ends up as fallout, either from nuclear reactors like the Fukushima and the Chernobyl reactors, or it ends up as fallout from nuclear weapons. That's the truth of it. So I say to you, if you're involved in the campaign now, keep it up. We will win this one. The nuclear power industry is a dinosaur. It's a 20th century phenomenon that our children's children will look back on as one of those madnesses of the 20th century. We will finish it. If you're not already involved in the campaign, learn a bit more. Go on one of the websites, Japanese for Peace, the Australian Conservation Foundation, ICANN, MAPW, Friends of the Earth. There's lots of information. Get involved and get active. What we need to do is we need to make sure that no more Australian uranium fuels a Fukushima or another one. We need to keep it in the ground. We need to keep it safe where it should be. Thank you very much.
In 1983, ALP Senator Ruth Coleman took it upon herself to start documenting nuclear accidents around the world. And in 1991, Green senator and nuclear campaigner Jo Valentine released her book, Let the Facts Speak. In 2006, that was updated and re-released by Green Senator Rachel Siewert. And today, Green Senator Scott Ludlam will be launching the 4th edition of Let the Facts Speak in Perth at another rally to commemorate the Fukushima disaster, which we know are happening around the world in memory of the people who have lost their lives and continue to suffer. I urge people to look at this Let the Facts Speak, and you can find it on the website by just Googling Let the Facts Speak. It is a litany of incompetence by governments, incompetence by the nuclear industry, cover-ups, lack of regulation and safety standards going back since the nuclear industry was born decades ago. And in fact, 2012 marks the 70th anniversary of the Manhattan Project, which was the start of the whole nuclear catastrophe that has been with us since that time. So Scott Ludlam will be releasing this formally today in Perth. I urge people to look at it. It describes a whole lot of catastrophes, accidents, near misses, incompetence by government, incompetence by the nuclear industry, and the misery and suffering that the nuclear industry and its accidents and near misses, its emissions and its contamination of the planet have visited upon us over the last decades. And despite all this, we have governments that still back the nuclear industry, and we have nuclear lobbyists who push for it. We don't need it. We can use renewable energy, solar, wind, geothermal, energy efficiency. That's the way of the future. The nuclear industry should be shut down as soon as possible. Thank you.
In 1945, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In 1957, wind scale. 1979, 3 Mile Island. In 1986, Chernobyl. Year 2011, Fukushima. 66 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, people around the world learned another Japanese name associated with major nuclear disaster. Humanity failed to make Chernobyl as the last nuclear disaster in human history. Fukushima, this latest nuclear disaster is ongoing disaster. As Bill Williams explained and Mark Beavis explained, still hundreds of thousands of people are displaced. Right now, only 2 out of 54 nuclear reactors are operational in Japan. One will going to be shut down in a couple of weeks. And the very last one is scheduled to be shut down at the end of April. Well, now the power company says early May. In any case, this proves that Japan can live without nuclear power. However, Japanese government, power companies, and the nuclear industry are pushing hard to restart nuclear reactors. Why are they making such an irrational, incomprehensible choice? There are many reasons. Of course, business is involved. But one of the main reasons is they still have access to nuclear fuel. And Australia is one of the largest suppliers of uranium to Japan. As the Australian government acknowledged last year, the uranium from Australia is used at actually all those broken, damaged reactors in Fukushima. This means that the radioactive substance which continue to contaminate air, soil, land, and people's food. Many of them comes from this country, Australia. However, since March 11 last year, Australian government and the uranium industry in Australia are actually trying to expand uranium mining businesses. As you heard, the government approved the expansion of Olympic Dam mine in South Australia, which will make the world's largest uranium mine. This mine alone will produce the same amount of uranium which Kazakhstan, which was last year's world's largest uranium producer, produced 19,000 tons a year. Last year, again in South Australia, the uranium mine called Honeymoon Mine started operation. This latest uranium mine in Australia is actually 49% owned by Japanese trading firm. And last year, Prime Minister of this country, Julia Gillard, announced to lift the ban on uranium export to India. It is no coincidence that shortly after, Japanese government announced that they're going to restart the negotiation on civil nuclear agreement with India. They just want to export a nuclear reactor to India, and Australia wants to export uranium. And now what? New South Wales government is trying to lift the ban on uranium mining. Nuclear power has never been sustainable, and it will never be. Some people want to argue that, oh, Fukushima happened, it's because of all the nuclear reactors. If you use the latest technology, if you use the newest reactor, it's safe. Just like the guy, the chancellor of the university across the street called Ziggy Switkowski keeps saying that. It's not true. As what Fukushima proved is that the nuclear power actually requires workers who are exposed to excessive level of radiation, resulting in health hazard, even in normal operating circumstance, not just in an emergency. This is the same for uranium mining process. It continues to contaminate the environment, and it deprives the land rights of the people, Australian people, indigenous people. And also, uranium mining does not contribute to the economy as much, not to the job creation. It is only beneficial to only a handful of shareholders and executives of mining companies. This is also the same case for the nuclear industry. It is only beneficial to government, local government, power companies, and the nuclear industries. And the rest of the society pays the price. All the associated costs are paid by the rest of the society. And this is exactly what's happening in people in Fukushima. And as I speak, Australia keeps fueling nuclear reactors around the world. And we have to stop at the very beginning of this nuclear supply chain. It starts all here in Australia. We are the supplier of the nuclear fuel, and we must stop. We have to tell your friends and your family that we have to stop. And today's actually rally is being broadcast on live on the internet to show support to people in Japan. And then to this end, I would like your support to repeat a very simple Japanese phrase. This means that against nuclear power or oppose nuclear power, it's very simple. And it's just 4 syllables. It goes like this. Genpatsu hantai. 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 Thank you.
Outside the headquarters of BHP. We can all just move into their doorway or off the side for it to move it up into their
places and destroy the precious downstream to the process. Now they want to increase water consumption to 250 million litres every day. So we're 6% increase in water consumption, but they're not dealing with the topic at the moment. Radioactive waste coming, they have huge problems with that.
Uranium mining, no way! Uranium mining, no way! Uranium mining, no way! For their anti-worker stance, for their health and safety, the blood that continues to affect the people of Fukushima. As Sue said at the State Library, we need to look at the alternative forms of energy, at the renewable energy, at the burgeoning growth of alternative energy in Europe, emissions-free energy. We need to think to the future, and it's one thing to come here 1 year after Fukushima and say it wasn't a bad thing that happened, but it's yet another, and this is what we call on you all here today to say never again. Never again. We are going to stop the uranium industry in Australia. We're going to stop the uranium industry in Australia. And we are going to keep fighting all the way. And with that, we're going to end today's rally, but it's not only the end of the rally, it's just one more end, one more start in the campaign to end uranium mining in Australia, and as we've been saying for more than 35 years in Australia, to leave it in the ground. So thank you all for coming here today, but don't go home and